The Holocaust was one of the most shameful periods in human existence. Nearly 10 million civilians total, men, women, children, even infants, were coldly murdered. 6 million of them Jews. After the Holocaust, Jews were not given freedom right away. The Jews that survived the concentration camps didn't want to stay in Germany. Many of them instead longed to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. Britain, however, did not want them to immigrate to Palestine. The story of the SS Exodus 1947 was an eye-opener to the world of how cruel the British were to the Jewish immigrants, and was a primary cause of the British changing the Palestinian immigration policy, as well as an element regarding the establishment of the State of Israel. SS Exodus 1947 is one story of many about a ship carrying Jewish and non-Jewish survivors out of Germany. But SS Exodus was the ship that forced people to realize what these survivors were going through. After World War II, millions of Europeans were guarded and lived behind barbed wire fences, without medical care and other services, displaced person camps within Germany and Austria. European Jews then began organizing an underground network known as the Bricha Fight. The network moved thousands of Jews from camps to ports on the Mediterranean Sea, so they could be sent to Palestine by ship. This was part of what was known as the Aliyah Bet, or the Second Immigration, which was a series of attempts by European Jews to immigrate illegally to Palestine. The SS Exodus 1947 was the largest Aliyah Bet ship carrying the largest number of illegal immigrants to Palestine ever recorded. SS Exodus, formerly known as SS President Warfield, sailed on July 11, 1947, near Marseille. The boat carried 4,515 immigrants, including 655 children. As soon as the boat left the territorial waters of France, British destroyers accompanied it. The journey was quite rigorous, with little space and not much food to eat. On July 18th, near the coast of Palestine, but outside of territorial waters, the British rammed the ship and invaded it. The immigrants put a desperate defense. In this battle, a Jewish crew member and 2 passengers were killed. 30 other passengers suffered bullet wounds and other injuries. The ship was then towed to Haifa, where the immigrants were involuntarily put onto deportation ships headed to France. At Port de Bouc, in southern France, the would-be immigrants remained in ships' holds for 24 days, refusing to dismount despite the shortage of food, the heat wave, and the crowding, and the horrid sanitary conditions. The French government rejected the idea of forcing them off the boat. Eventually, the British decided to take the would-be immigrants to Germany. On August 22nd, the ship left for the port of Hamburg. In Hamburg, they were in the British occupation zone. The immigrants were forcibly taken off and transported to 2 camps near Lübeck. Displaced persons in camps all over Europe protested by staging a hunger strike when they heard the news. Large protests broke out on both sides of the Atlantic. After these protests, the public embarrassment for Britain played an important role in the sympathy towards the Jews and the eventual recognition of Jewish state in 1948. An American newspaper ran the headline, "Back to Rake," as the whole world was horrified. Delegates from the UN Special Commission on Palestine who watched what occurred were shocked as well. The Yugoslav delegate cited that what had happened to the Exodus is the best possible evidence we have of allowing Jews into Palestine. A large number of Jewish agencies worked to help the Jewish displaced persons. Survivors were provided with food and clothing by the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, while vocational training was provided by the Organization for Rehabilitation Through Training, or the ORT. Refugees also formed their own organizations, and many worked for the establishment of an independent Jewish state in Palestine. The State of Israel, being established in May 1948, provided a place for Jewish displaced persons or refugees to go. Around 170,000 Jewish displaced persons and refugees had immigrated to Israel by 1953. After the war, the British refused to allow the survivors of the Holocaust to settle down in Palestine. The British, who had received a mandate from the League of Nations to administer Palestine, severely restricted Jewish immigration there, largely because of Arab objections. Many countries closed their borders to immigration as well. Despite these obstacles, many Jewish displaced persons attempted to leave Europe as soon as possible. On June 6, 1946, President Truman urged the British government to free the Jews of suffering that were confined to displaced person camps in Europe by immediately accepting 100,000 Jewish immigrants. Some Jews were able to reach Palestine, many by way of old, battered, and decaying ships that members of the Jewish Residents Organization smuggled in. Between August 1945 and the establishment of the State of Israel in May 1948, 65 illegal immigrant ships carrying 69,878 people arrived from Europe's shores. In August 1946, however, the British began to constrain or ban those they caught in camps in Cyprus. Approximately 50,000 people were put away in the camps, 28,000 of which were still imprisoned when Israel declared independence. In the present day, this Jewish immigration is still occurring. There are still many Jews in France from after the war who are still immigrating to Israel. There was an attack in 2013 called the Charlie Hebdo attack, which was directed towards Jews living in France. Nearly 8,000 French Jews have moved to Israel since this attack. The number of Jews immigrating to Israel has doubled and then doubled again in the last 5 years. In conclusion, the SS Exodus 1947 showed the world that the British were being cruel and something had to be done about it. The SS Exodus was, as Yugoslav delegate cited, is the best possible evidence we have for allowing Jews into Palestine. Even though the outcome of the SS Exodus wasn't ideal at first, it helped many Jewish immigrants to be noticed by the governments of other countries, which later helped the Jews to Israel safely. However, this is clearly still a problem of where the Jews stand in Europe, causing them to migrate over to Israel just as the Jews in 1940s.